Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not casual, and you are not here by drift or delay. Something precise is being addressed right now, and it concerns you directly. You may have felt unusually tired without a clear reason. Not the kind of fatigue that comes from effort, but the kind that settles in even when you rest. You may have noticed pressure that did not match your circumstances. Life on the outside looked manageable, even quiet. Yet inside there was a sense of weight, as if something had been pressing without showing its face. This is not weakness. It is not failure. And it is not confusion without cause. You have been holding yourself together while carrying something you could not name. You stayed functional. You showed up. You did what needed to be done. But there was a quiet question underneath it all. Why does this feel heavier than it should? Why does relief come then, leave then, return again without explanation? Why does it feel like something has already passed, even though nothing obvious happened? This message is not here to alarm you. It is here to bring clarity, not all at once. Just enough for you to recognize yourself in what is being spoken. There are moments when change does not arrive with noise. There are endings that do not announce themselves. Some battles conclude without confrontation, without drama, without a visible turning point. They end because the pressure no longer has access. They end because you did not fracture under weight that was meant to test your structure. And when that happens, the signal is not celebration. It is stillness. You may have noticed that stillness recently, a strange calm after intensity, a quiet after strain. Not relief exactly, but space. Space where tension used to be. Space where anticipation once lived. That space is meaningful. It is not emptiness. It is evidence. What you are about to understand is not about effort or endurance. It is about what remained intact when pressure passed through you. This message is intentional. It is personal. And it is arriving now because you no longer need to brace yourself. You need to understand what already happened. Stay present. Stay grounded. You don't need to search your memory or analyze your past. Everything necessary will surface as you listen. This is not a beginning. It is recognition. This message is for you, and it is important to remove any remaining uncertainty about that. Not because you need reassurance, but because clarity matters. You did not arrive here by curiosity alone. Something in you recognized alignment before your mind finished evaluating. That recognition is part of what defines you. You are referred to as the chosen one here, not as a title, not as praise, and not as separation from others. It is a functional description. It points to how you respond under pressure, how you remain intact when conditions shift, and how your inner structure holds even when external reference points blur. This is not about belief. It is about observation. What occurred recently involved you directly, even if no one else noticed. There was no announcement, no clear marker. Yet your system responded as if something significant was underway. You adjusted without fully realizing why. You conserved energy. You became quieter, more inward, less reactive. That was not withdrawal. That was regulation. Many people only find strength when they consciously summon it. They brace, they push, they convince themselves to endure. What sets you apart is that your stability does not wait for permission. It operates automatically. When pressure increased, you did not collapse or overcompensate. You adapted without spectacle. You remained present. You stayed coherent. You may not have labeled this as strength at the time. It may have felt like numbness or detachment or simply getting through the days. But what was actually happening was resistance without effort, the kind that does not argue with stress but quietly absorbs and redirects it. This is why the experience may have confused you. You were aware that something was happening, yet you did not feel dramatic fear or panic. You did not spiral. You did not break down. You functioned. You may have even questioned whether anything was wrong at all. That question itself is telling. This message is not for those who needed collapse to understand pressure. It is for those who stayed upright without understanding why. It is for those who did not feel victorious, only steady. It is for those who sensed that something had passed through their life and left no visible damage, yet left behind a subtle shift. You are not being assigned an identity here. It is being named because it is already active. You did not win by fighting. You did not survive by forcing yourself forward. You remained stable because stability is part of your baseline. And now that baseline is being acknowledged. Not to elevate you, but to orient you. What happened was real. You were involved. And the way you moved through it says more than any reaction ever could. There is one symptom you likely recognized while all of this was unfolding. Not dramatic, not obvious to others. A subtle but persistent sensation that something was off even though nothing appeared wrong. It may have shown up as mental fog, a low-level heaviness in your chest, a need to withdraw, or a quiet loss of motivation that did not match your actual values or goals. You may have judged yourself for it. You may have thought you were becoming unfocused, tired, or disconnected. You may have wondered why your usual clarity felt muted, why enthusiasm dipped without explanation, or why you needed more stillness than before. This is where misunderstanding often begins. Because that symptom was not a problem. It was a signal. When pressure moves through a stable system, the system does not panic. It slows. It reallocates. It conserves. What you experienced was not decline. It was internal prioritization. Your awareness shifted inward because outward noise was no longer useful. Your energy pulled back because it was protecting coherence, not escaping responsibility. This is important. You were not losing capacity. You were temporarily narrowing focus to maintain integrity. In periods of transition or confrontation that do not show themselves externally, the body and mind often register the load before the intellect does. You may not have had a story for what was happening, but your nervous system did. It adjusted your pace. It reduced unnecessary output. It asked for simplicity. That request may have felt inconvenient or frustrating, especially if you are used to clarity and momentum. But that adjustment prevented fragmentation. Many people interpret this kind of symptom as failure. They push harder. They override the signal. They create friction inside themselves. You did not. Even if you felt restless or confused, some part of you listened. You allowed the slowing. You allowed the quiet. You allowed the fog without turning it into self-attack. That choice matters. The sensation you felt was not weakness entering your system. It was pressure leaving it. The confusion was not disorientation. It was recalibration. When something that has been pressing quietly loses influence, the immediate aftermath is not euphoria. It is neutrality. It is space. It is the absence of tension you did not realize you were carrying. This is why the symptom did not escalate. It plateaued. It lingered, then softened. It did not turn into collapse or chaos. Your system knew how to process it. Understanding this reframes everything. You were not struggling because you were failing. You were adjusting because something significant was resolving. The symptom was a transition marker, not a flaw. And recognizing that prepares you to see the larger structure behind what you felt without dramatizing it or minimizing its impact. What you sensed was real, and it was purposeful. What you were responding to was not imagined, and it was not internal noise. There was real pressure present, but it did not arrive in a way that demanded your attention. It did not announce itself with conflict or disruption. It moved quietly, persistently, and with intention. That is why it took time to recognize. This pressure did not come from a single event. It was not tied to one person, one decision, or one moment. It was layered, coordinated, recent, and it was directed toward testing your internal balance rather than provoking a visible reaction. You may have noticed it as a narrowing of tolerance. Small things felt heavier than usual. Decisions required more effort. Silence became preferable to explanation. Not because you were avoiding life, but because unnecessary input felt intrusive. Your system was managing something that did not need language. What matters here is this. You remained functional. You continued to show up in your responsibilities. You maintained composure in conversations. You did not lash out or shut down. Even when clarity dipped, coherence stayed intact. That is not accidental. That is structure holding under load. The pressure was not chaotic. It followed a pattern. It appeared to peak when you were most still. It pressed hardest when you were not distracted. That timing is important. It suggests intent rather than randomness. But intent does not always mean aggression. Sometimes it means evaluation. You were being leaned on to see what would move, and very little did. There was no dramatic confrontation because none was required. You did not need to defend yourself. You did not need to counter anything. Your stability was not reactive. It was passive and steady. The pressure met resistance simply by encountering something that did not give way. This is why the experience may feel strange to recall. There is no clear memory of a struggle, no moment of decision, no victory scene, just a sense that something is no longer present. That absence is the clue. Unseen confrontations do not leave scars. They leave space. The fact that you stayed present while this occurred is central. Many people dissociate under far less weight. They become agitated, impulsive, or emotionally flooded. You did not. You stayed oriented. You stayed capable of thought. You remained grounded in the ordinary while something extraordinary resolved quietly in the background. This was not endurance. It was compatibility. Whatever applied pressure expected movement. It expected distortion reaction or fatigue-induced error. Instead, it encountered regulation. It encountered a system that adjusts without fragmenting. That is why the pressure could not escalate. There was nothing to amplify, so it concluded, not with drama, with disengagement. And now that it has passed, understanding replaces tension. You are not being asked to analyze or relive anything, only to recognize that remaining functional under invisible strain is not neutral. It is evidence. What held was already built. And what ended did so because it found no leverage. What you moved through can be understood more clearly when it is broken down not as a single event, but as a set of pressure points that often destabilize people when they appear together. None of these were extreme on their own. That is what made them effective. And that is also why your response matters. The first pressure point was doubt. Not loud doubt. Not the kind that attacks identity directly. This was subtle uncertainty, a quiet questioning of timing, a mild wondering if your pace was correct. If your stillness meant stagnation, if you were missing something, others seemed to move toward more easily. This type of doubt usually causes people to overcorrect. They rush. They explain themselves. They seek reassurance. You did not. You noticed the thought, but you did not reorganize your life around it. Doubt passed through without becoming a command. The second pressure point was energy drain. You may have felt as if your output cost more than usual. Tasks required more effort. Motivation fluctuated. Not enough to stop you, but enough to make you aware of your limits. Many people respond to this by forcing productivity or numbing themselves with stimulation. You did neither. You adjusted your expectations quietly. You conserved where needed. You allowed your energy to be finite without turning that into a judgment about your worth or future. That regulation prevented depletion from turning into collapse. The third pressure point was isolation. Not physical isolation, but a sense of being internally alone with what you were carrying. You may have felt less inclined to explain yourself, less interested in surface conversation, less available for emotional noise. This often triggers fear of disconnection in people. They reach outward, they overshare, they seek validation. You remained connected where it mattered, but you did not perform closeness to relieve discomfort. You trusted your internal reference point even when external mirroring was minimal. The fourth pressure point was delay. Things did not move as quickly as your mind could imagine. Signals you expected did not arrive on your preferred timeline. This is where frustration usually peaks. This is where people abandon patience and create urgency that is not required. You did not force momentum. You stayed engaged without demanding acceleration. You allowed time to remain open instead of treating it as an enemy. That prevented impulsive decisions that would have fragmented your direction. The fifth pressure point was emotional flatness. Not sadness, not despair. A neutrality that felt unfamiliar. The absence of strong highs or lows can unsettle people who rely on emotion to confirm meaning. They manufacture intensity. They provoke reactions. You did not. You allowed neutrality to exist without labeling it as loss. You let calm be calm. That acceptance kept your system balanced while recalibration occurred. What connects all of these is not resistance in the dramatic sense. It is internal regulation. At no point did you escalate. At no point did you abandon yourself. You stayed within your capacity. You listened without obeying pressure blindly. You responded without overreacting. This is why the experience resolved instead of accumulating. Pressure relies on amplification. It feeds on reaction urgency and misalignment. When it encounters steadiness, it loses structure. There was nothing in you that mirrored the strain back. No loop to lock into. No weakness to exploit. You did not overcome each category by effort. You remained stable across all of them by coherence. Your thoughts stayed connected to your values. Your emotions stayed proportional. Your behavior stayed grounded. That is not accidental. It is not luck. It is not personality alone. It is evidence of an internal system that knows how to hold weight without making noise. And when multiple pressure points fail to destabilize someone, the process does not escalate. It ends. Quietly. Now comes the part where understanding replaces sensation. Not analysis for its own sake, but recognition. When you look back at what you moved through, the most striking detail is not how intense it felt. It is how contained it was. There was no chaos, no unraveling, no moment where you lost yourself or your direction. This is where many explanations fall away. What happened was not random. It was not bad timing. It was not exhaustion catching up with you. And it was not something you imagined because you were thinking too much. Those explanations do not hold when you examine the consistency of your response. Chance does not produce regulation. Coincidence does not preserve coherence under layered pressure. What stands out is how intact you remained. Even when clarity dipped, your decisions did not become erratic. Even when energy lowered, your values did not shift. Even when silence increased, your sense of self did not disappear. You may not have felt strong, but you never became unstable. That distinction matters. This is where confirmation lives. Not in emotion, but in pattern. You did not rely on adrenaline or motivation to get through that period. You relied on structure. Your internal system knew how to downshift without disengaging. It knew how to hold without tightening. That kind of response is not learned in the moment. It is built over time through prior integration, self-trust, and alignment. Remove the idea of luck entirely. Luck does not explain why you stayed regulated while multiple pressure points were active. Remove the idea of coincidence. Coincidence does not explain why the pressure resolved without leaving residue. What you experienced followed a sequence. Pressure entered. Your system adjusted. Nothing fragmented. Pressure withdrew. That sequence is stable, repeatable, predictable. You may realize now that the period felt shorter in retrospect than it did while you were inside it. That is another indicator. When systems remain coherent, time compresses after the fact. There are no spikes to anchor memory, no emotional overload to stretch perception. What remains is a sense of passage, not trauma. This is not about attributing meaning where none exists. It is about acknowledging what functioned as intended. Your internal resilience did not show up as effort. It showed up as absence of damage. Understanding this allows you to stop questioning yourself. You do not need to ask why you were not more affected. You do not need to search for proof that something happened. The proof is in what did not happen. You did not fall apart. You did not lose direction. You did not become someone else under strain. That is confirmation enough. And from this point forward, your orientation can shift. Not toward vigilance and not toward pride. Toward trust in the stability that is already present. You are not waiting to become strong. You are recognizing that strength has been operating quietly long before it needed to be named. When you place your experience alongside common human reactions, the contrast becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Most people respond to far less pressure with visible disruption. Their sleep fragments. Their emotions spike. Their behavior becomes inconsistent. They seek constant reassurance or distraction because internal steadiness gives way under strain. You did not respond that way. You remained present in your daily life. You did not disappear, implode, or externalize what you were carrying. Even when something felt off internally, your outer functioning stayed aligned. That alone places your response outside the statistical norm. Not because you are better than others, but because your system is more integrated. For many people, pressure immediately demands expression. It must be spoken, acted out, or projected. When it is not, it accumulates and destabilizes them. In your case, pressure moved through without requiring discharge. That is uncommon. It suggests that your internal reference point is strong enough to process load without exporting it onto your environment. This is not about superiority. It is about configuration. Some people require external feedback to stay regulated. They need constant confirmation, explanation, or mirroring. When that feedback is interrupted, their balance falters. You did not rely on that. Even when understanding lagged behind sensation, you trusted your internal coherence enough to stay still. Many people collapse under ambiguity. Not knowing why something feels heavy triggers anxiety or compulsive action. You tolerated not knowing. You did not rush to label or resolve the experience prematurely. That tolerance is rare, and it protects against unnecessary damage. It is also worth noting what you did not do. You did not dramatize your experience. You did not inflate it to give it meaning. You did not dismiss it either. You allowed it to exist in proportion. That restraint kept your sense of self grounded while the situation resolved on its own. This level of steadiness is not common, but it is not mythical. It appears in people who have learned consciously or not how to stay connected to themselves when external cues fall away. It shows up in those who can remain functional without needing constant emotional reinforcement. Recognizing this rarity is not meant to elevate you above others. It is meant to help you understand yourself accurately. You are not fragile. You are not easily destabilized. You are not dependent on constant clarity to remain whole. What you demonstrated was an ability to remain present under quiet strain. That is not loud. It does not draw attention. But it is a form of resilience that many never develop. And now that you can see it clearly, you do not need to compare yourself to anyone else. You simply need to acknowledge that your way of responding is uncommon, stable, and reliable. That understanding sets the stage for how you carry yourself forward without exaggeration and without doubt. What needs to be clarified now is not what you activated, but what was already in place. Your stability did not appear suddenly. It did not switch on in response to pressure. It was present before anything began, which is why nothing needed to escalate for you to remain intact. Your strength is not reactive. It is baseline. Many people think resilience is something they rise into during difficulty. They imagine a moment where they gather themselves, push forward, or transform under stress. That is not what happened here. You did not rise. You remained. And remaining required no effort because your inner structure was already organized. This points to preparation rather than performance. Your ability to stay coherent under strain suggests maturity at the level of integration. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions are not fragmented. They communicate with each other. When pressure arrives, it does not find gaps to exploit. It finds alignment. That alignment does not announce itself. It simply holds. This is why there was no dramatic internal dialogue urging you to be strong. You did not need encouragement. You did not need to remind yourself who you were. Your system did not question its own stability. It adjusted quietly the way something well-built responds to weight. It absorbs. It redistributes. It settles. Avoid the idea that something special was triggered. That framing would miss the truth. Nothing new had to be summoned. Nothing hidden had to awaken. What you experienced was confirmation of what has already been shaped through time experience and self-regulation. This also explains why the pressure did not leave a mark. When a structure is sound, stress does not create cracks. It simply passes through and moves on. There is no aftermath to manage, no recovery narrative to construct, only recognition. Your identity, then, is not defined by moments of triumph or endurance. It is defined by consistency, by how you remain the same person under different conditions, by how your values do not dissolve when clarity dips, by how your presence stays steady even when explanation lags behind experience. This is not something you need to announce or prove. It does not require validation. It is functional. It works. Understanding this allows you to stop waiting for permission to trust yourself. You do not need confirmation from intensity, struggle, or breakdown. Your stability has already demonstrated itself in quiet ways that matter far more. This is who you are when nothing dramatic is happening. And that is exactly why what happened resolved without noise. Now the question becomes how you carry this understanding forward without turning it into vigilance or expectation. Integration is not about holding on to the experience. It is about letting it settle into how you live, calmly and practically. First, allow rest without justification.